Welcome to another episode of From Shadows to Strength podcast. I am your host, Tyson, along with my guest today, Kasper Vatras. So if you have not already done so, please hit the subscribe button so you never miss another podcast episode. And today we're going to be listening to Kasper give us an introduction into understanding his approach to therapy. So Kasper, Thank you for being here with us today.
My pleasure again. Thank you for the opportunity.
So I'm gonna let my audience know this episode is gonna be kind of a two-part. The first part, Kasper is going to be giving us a introduction into his approach to therapy, as I said in the intro, and there might be some questions I ask along the way, but mostly we're going to be shutting up and listening to him break it down for us. And then the second one, we're going to get into specifics, which will be done a little bit later on today. So please, Kasper, I'm going to hand you the floor.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak and espouse all this great information. My intention of coming on today is to talk about how to understand your psychology. And, I'm remiss. I imagine a lot of this is going to be repetition from the previous episode we did, but a little preamble. The modus operandum of my practice is, how can you hope to change anything if you don't understand it? So unless you understand I don't even want to say little intricacies. If you can't understand how your psychology works, why it is the way that it is, that's kind of the biggest line that I've got here today, then you're not going to be able to change shit. Like, you're not going to be able to understand anxiety, depression, compulsive behavior, activity, why we get snappy or why we procrastinate. These very simple behaviors that we see all the time. But when you ask someone, why do you do that? They kind of go, I'm not sure. I don't know. My goal here today is to talk about why those exist and using an evolutionary psychology perspective on that. So we are the way that we are, and we have the behaviors that we have, and this is to say, and this really expands to topics like self-esteem and self-concept, how we form associations and why we have reactions to certain things. Again, when I say why we are the way that we are, I mean at such a granular level, at an evolutionary level. We have to look at the context in which we evolved. And to that, the first line that I always have for clients, and again, actually, let me add on to this is how I start my work with almost every client I have. There are edge cases where I don't need to talk about this as much, typically for interpersonal issues and social issues. But for the vast majority of the time, this is where the work has to start, in my opinion. And again, the first session that I have with any client is largely a lecture. So how does that sound starting off? Great, cool, okay. So you are you are the way that you are because of evolutionary pressures, because of selection. And understanding the context in which we evolved is necessary for that. So the first area that I always start off with clients is talking about stress. Stress is everything. Stress is, and I'm going to define that term. I'm going to make it clear as to what I mean by stress. I'm going to make sure you understand what it is not, because we all have this colloquial understanding of what stress is and what it is not. And, some things are stressful, but what does that mean? And biologists and anyone who works with animals and, even physiology professionals like doctors, they'll have a different definition of stress versus the layperson or people in other domains. So we have to understand stress. And the first way that I want to explain it before getting into the nitty-gritty is that stress is to you what light is to a plant. It's everything. It is survival. Without light, a plant can't do shit. And a plant will adapt and change so much for light. It'll change the angle. I use my hands a lot here for anyone viewing. Or for anyone listening only, I'll try to make it clear what I'm talking about. They will change the panels that they have, the leaves that they have, in terms of the direction that they're facing and the color that they have. They will grow and adapt in all kinds of different directions to make sure that they have light. And we do this in much more complex ways with stress. So the first thing I want to note with stress is stressors. To define this term, and I'm going to be giving example after example until we understand this completely, is a stressor is anything that costs you your resources. What are your resources? We're going to keep it simple. Time, just kind of a constant. mainly energy and attention. When I say energy, I'm talking calories. I'm talking physiological resources. Body, physiology, what interacts with this, material plane, as it were. And I'm also talking about attention, which I'll lump into, I use that as a label, the term attention, but what I'm really talking about here is mental resources. How much we can focus on something, how much we can process, how many things we can have going on at once without something slipping. The evolutionary context, the evolutionary perspective, I'm going to be applying readily here. And what happens when we use too many of our resources up? We're more compromised. We're more likely to die. We're more likely to have something slip up. We're more likely to get sick, and that leads to death. So when I'm talking about the evolutionary perspective, what I'm talking about here is your body wants to survive more than anything, and everything is about survival. Your psychology is always trying to survive. I'm not going to be talking about going into survival mode too much. And I don't really talk too much about the fight or flight stuff, although it comes up every once in a while. That's not the angle I'm taking here. What I'm trying to help a client understand, and where this usually goes to, is, again, clients wanting to understand anxiety, depression, compulsive behavior, avoidant behavior, reactivity, etc. And those all deal with stress. Those are all ways of managing stress. And that's what I hope to define here. Again, a stressor is anything that costs you your time, energy, or attention. The more astute of you might note that it's when you do anything. It's when your body has to adapt in any way, or your psychology has to adapt in any way. So a stressor, I want to make very clear, is not something that feels good or feels bad. This is irrelevant. It does not matter for what I'm talking about here. And a stressor is not something that is good for you or bad for you. There are some things that are very stressful and they're good for us, or bad for us. Like this is a value judgment. I'm trying to get to the base level here to say a stressor is anything that costs you your time, energy, and attention. Whenever you have to adapt to something, you have to use energy, resources to move towards that kind of a thing. Again, we run out of resources, we die, or become more compromised, and we're more likely to die. This is what your subconscious is running on. These are the heuristics in which your brain operates at a hardware level, an OS level, perhaps. I'm not too adept at computers, so I shouldn't be using those metaphors too much. But so let's go through some examples. Of first, top, highest priority here is going to be physiological stressors. Your psychology changes on a dime under physiological stressors, And we all know the cute examples of, being hangry. When I get hungry, I become pissier or mean and everything seems negative and shitty. And we know when we're, sleepy or tired, it gets, we stay up past our bedtime a little bit and we become more morose or, a little bit more sad or thoughtful or depressed, generally speaking, which that's a point I'm going to be getting to a little bit later. Our psychology changes so readily. And I'll get into further examples. I like to spend a lot of time on physiological stressors because there's the key line here where if you don't have a healthy body, you cannot have a healthy mind. Period. Simple as.
Absolutely.
And vice versa. How are you going to take care of your body if you don't know what you're doing? If your psychology is compromised in various different ways. Physiological stressors are going to include, and I'm just going to list off a whole bunch of simplistic ones: being too hot, being too cold, being, hungry, or being too bloated, eating too much. All of these things are going to require resources for your body to adapt, for your body to change, to regulate temperature, to regulate digestion. It includes being in pain, having a rash, having an infection, stubbing your toe. Anytime your body needs to adjust or adapt, this is going to be a physiological stressor. Anything that is antithetical to survival, well, hold on, that can be a value judgment. That can be a little complex. Whenever your body, I'll get to the base thing. Whenever your body needs to spend resources to adapt, we will call this a stressor. Again, not a bad thing, not a good thing. Not something that's good for you or bad for you. This is irrelevant. It doesn't matter. It's just the spending of these resources. And, in a little bit, I'm going to be bringing up a model where we're talking about stress extensively and the relationship that we have with stress. First, I want to showcase some quick examples of how your psychology changes on a dime when we're physiologically stressed. One is a flu, a gorgeous example of a depression. And this is what a lot of doctors are going to, any physician, anyone who's working with in the physiological domain is going to be calling a flu. Your body enters a depression, and it's not too different from the psychological domain. The only difference is here is that we put more of an emphasis on, or that we should, because there's a lot of different practitioners in my field and they practice all very differently. We should put a little bit more emphasis on the behavioral, although physiologists, physiological professionals will do this as well, but the psychological, the cognitive factors. So a flu, what's going on here? Your brain detects that there is an infection going on. And it knows that if I don't take care of this right away, this can become a runaway infection. And this can cause exponentially more damage. I could have organ failure. There can be like major shutting down of many systems. So what does your body do when it detects a flu? Hour 0, you're as normal as can be. You're baseline. 1 hour later, 2 hours later, 3 hours later, you might be bedridden, sick. And look at all the changes that have occurred, psychological especially. You feel as if you can do nothing. You don't want to do anything. Look at the motivational process is changing here. Your brain barely works. You can barely keep your eyes open, and you feel as if you can't move. The question we want to be asking readily, and I'm going to be doing this throughout the talk that we have here, is why would my brain be doing this? I noted this in our first conversation. There are no largely, especially with like basic behavioral pieces, there are no glitches. There are generally no things going haywire. Things aren't broken. They're occurring for a very specific reason. This is why we see it across individuals. So again, why would my brain be doing this? Why would my brain be making me feel as if I can't do anything, not want to do anything? I no longer enjoy things that I used to enjoy. I can barely use my brain and body. Why? Why would my brain be creating these symptoms? Yeah. The answer is your brain wants you to sit down and do nothing. It wants you to stop expending resources. It wants you to not compromise what it is trying to do. Your brain is trying to pool all of its resources into managing the autoimmune response, pooling all that blood into your core so that it can take care of those viruses or whatever infection. Well, for influenza, it would be a virus, right? It wants to manage that completely. Another point here is musculoskeletally, nothing's changed in those 3 hours. Largely. Bear with me. I speak, I'm a clinician here. I work with clients individually. I can speak hyperbole a little bit more. I have to choose my words a little bit more carefully on this forum. Largely nothing has changed. You still have the same muscle glycogen in your muscles. Your tendons, your ligaments, your bones, they're not inflamed or compromised in any way. And yet we feel as if we can't do anything. We feel as if we can't do anything. Now, gun to your head, or more realistically, the fear of shitting yourself on the couch, those are the only reasons you might move, right? Those are the only reasons you might get up and start moving around. Otherwise, we say, I feel like I can't do it. And I just, oh my God, I can't do shit. You don't want to do anything. Again, why? Your brain is trying to make you sit down, do nothing, so that it can take care of what it needs to do. This is an infection is extremely serious, and your brain wants to remedy that immediately. Your brain is putting you on timeout, effectively. If you were to do what you wanted to do, and if you were to try to push further, like, oh no, I really need to get this I have the marathon coming up. I gotta train for it, right? Or,
Right.
oh, I really need to do all this work. I really need to push for it. What do we usually see? And there's like a wealth of studies on this. The infection gets worse. Sometimes more serious concerns can pop up, or the pathology can become worsened, I should say. Or we just progress how long it takes for your body to take care of that thing. If your body wants something from you, it will take it. In fact, later on, I'll be using a metaphor of the relationship between, us and our psychology. That's to say, our mind and our brain. That's to say, the two different parts of our psychology, and how your brain is like a horse and you are like a individual. Like if your brain wants to go and do something, if that horse wants to go and do something, you're screwed. Like you're along for the ride. You can't stop that thing from going and doing what it's doing. That's why so many people have behavioral issues. But no pun intended, I'm putting the cart before the horse here. I'm jumping a little bit far ahead. Need to talk about stressors a little bit more. So your psychology will change on a dime under stress, under physiological stressors as well. Look at the behavioral changes that occur when we have some food poisoning, whether we're stuck sitting on a toilet or bending over a toilet. If we have a God, we might be denouncing them. If we don't have one, we might be praying to one. Say we're more of a stoic person, we might be, begging the other individual, I'm so sorry, if you could please just help me. And I'm so sorry. Our personalities will change. The things we want and desire will change. The beliefs that we have can just be thrown away. The big, core, complex heuristics that we choose to live with can just go away under these stressors. We can understand, if I fuck up, excuse my language, if I screw up one more time, she's going to leave me. And then under these stressors, we can continue to do negative stuff. We can continue to use, we continue to snap, we continue to scream and yell. Why? These are the answers these are the questions I'm going to be answering shortly. Physiological stressors, huge. Actually, let me take a little break here. Any questions about physiological stressors so far?
No, I mean, everything you're saying makes sense. This really brings me back to one of my favorite trilogies of all time, which is Star Wars. Your feelings betray you.
Yeah,
Because
certainly.
that's the thing, right? Is you're nailing everything on the head. We feel a certain way, therefore we are. But it's like, no,
Yep.
you're not broken. You're not feeling great. No one's denying that, especially when to any of the male listeners, which is most of my audience, we get a man cold, we get a man flu. Like, yeah, you're literally praying, God, let me recover. Please. This is it might be the worst you've ever felt. And you just want to get past it. And yeah, your analogy hits it right on the head when it comes to that analogy of the flu, of being sick, what our body's requiring, yet the contention or the battle that we might have in our mind, where especially for those of us who love to work out, that's our identity. It's not motivation, it's not discipline, it's who we are, right? I go to the gym Monday to Friday, right? So what, now I can't work out because I'm sick? No, but how sick am I? Right. And then we start to, is it just in my head? Well, if it's just a head cold, I can still go train. Or, well, this is a flu. I guess I have to take time off.
Yeah.
And I see that with clients that I coach, right? I had actually just one this past week. My co-host, Jay, he got sick and he came in one day, wasn't feeling great. Okay, well, if you want to train, fine, but we're not going to push hard. Sure enough, the next day he came in, didn't look very good. Bro, you're not training. You're taking the day. If you're going to walk on the treadmill, that's fine, but you're not training legs. That's really going to compromise your immune system. And sure enough, the next day, even just coming in to walk, the next day was a write-off for him. He was not in. So yeah, everything you're saying rings a bell.
Yeah, you're touching on something that's so cool here. And there are multiple points I want to add to it, which is, your brain is sending you signals through feelings and emotions, but also through the behaviors it has. And when you can understand what these signals are, again, like depression, anxiety, compulsive behavior, procrastination, avoidant behavior, etc., we can actually start doing something with them. They're not pathologies inherently. Nothing's broken and nothing's all screwed up. And that's what I'm trying to showcase here. So let me. I get too excited. There are so many topics
Please
coming to mind.
carry on, because that's all I wanted to state. And I think just for the audience, absolutely, the feelings, a lot of the time, our feelings betray us. I mean, we're diagnosed with something, and now that label enables us to justify horrible behavior and turn to extreme coping mechanisms. And this is something I know you're going to talk about. So continue, please.
Well, a little bit of ignorance can, really screw us up. But again, I'm just getting too excited. I want to talk about addiction like crazy here, because that's where things go really, really awry. We're very much awry. I'm even more excited to talk about this next big chunk about the dichotomy to our psychology, because that's where we can really understand, why do I want to do something and yet I do the opposite? Well, there are two different there are two different parts of you that both have a hand on the steering wheel. However, again. So back to stressors.
Let's continue.
Physiological, number one, like it is quite literal survival. Your brain is going, this is compromised. There's some kind of threat to my physical safety. And if that goes to shit, I'm dead. So I got to change. Now, just a little bit below that, we're going to talk about social stressors. And social stressors are massive for largely the same reasons. Your brain, well, let me jump back here a little bit. With physiological stressors, it's so intuitive to everybody that, yeah, if my physiology gets compromised, I die. If I get sick, bad. So of course my brain's going to do something. But then things get so much more complex with the social domain. And to understand that, we really have to get into the, again, evolutionary psychology. What is the context in which we evolved? So social stressors, actually, let me say another piece here, is your brain. I'm going to start off boldly and then I'll explain after. Your brain thinks that if you are socially compromised, you're going to die because that's how things were. So now I'll expand. We lived in small groups. Dunbar's number, 150. It's the representative of how many close relationships we can keep in our mind at any given time throughout our life, generally. We can only keep roughly 150. Why does that number exist? Why does that limit exist? Well, that's as much as we ever grew up with. That's as much as our group, our tribe, our kin ever developed around. That's what we were around. Maximum 150. And oftentimes a lot less. I'm not talking about 1,000 years ago or 100 years ago. I'm not talking about, 5,000 years ago. I'm talking about 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100, 200,000 years ago and more. That's the evolutionary scale we're talking about. We do not evolve that quickly. A lot of these things don't, I can't fall into any digressions here. I'm going to keep bringing myself back. Evolution occurs at such a long scale, especially for such huge changes. And what's really important for people to understand is we were in the exact same context for thousands, tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds, depending on how far back you want to go for different things, hundreds of thousands of years. And it's only the last, it's been exponential. It's only the last 10 years that things have changed incredibly. 100 that they've changed, holy moly, like that's a lot of change. And it's only the last 1,000 or 5,000 that things have changed pretty largely. We're starting to develop some pretty interesting technologies at that point. But in the span of, and I'm using my hands here, I'll explain what I'm drawing essentially. In the span of human history, 5,000 might as well be a hair on the end of what we're talking about. It makes no difference, virtually no difference to our evolution. So what's the context in which we evolved? We lived around, and I'm taking a lot of liberties here. I'm speaking very broadly, very broad strokes for the sake of time. We evolved with this, or excuse me, not evolved. We lived with the same, let's say, 100 people our entire life. What they thought of us would quite literally be life or death. What they thought that if we screwed something up, we would get kicked out. We evolved to be such social creatures. I use this line that lone wolves, humans as lone wolves, I'm gonna be on my own. They died out hundreds of thousands of years ago, probably before we even became humans or proto-humans, because it's just so counter to survival. If we break a leg or we get sick, we can't gather resources, and we die. So we don't pass on our genes. And being pro-social, that's to say, not engaging in antisocial behavior. Being empathic, that's to say, understanding the perspectives of others and how other people might be feeling about certain things. Giving your extras to others. Playing nice with other people is what I'm talking about. And more importantly, not playing badly with other people. This provides immense benefit to survival. Immense. First off, we break a leg or we get sick. They'll help us out and we survive. So we continue to pass on our genes. So already at an evolutionary selection level, massive advantage. These people are passing on their genes a lot more. And the people who are more and more considerate than others, that's to say they engage in even less antisocial behavior, even more pro-social behavior, they survive even better. They're liked even more. They can manage through a lot, so much more adversity, so much more difficulty, so much more stress. What's more, other benefits. I can just do broad strokes, stuff like, safety in numbers, but you have specificity of labor. Hunting with 3 people, much easier than hunting alone. doing any tasks. We all have our different lives, and we all, especially, think about the evolutionary context here. We all have different skills and abilities, both physiologically and through our experience. So if you have somebody who's really good at hunting or a person who's really good at fishing, yeah, let them do that and let them crush at that. Much more specificity to what they're doing. And if some people are very good at, other jobs, gathering, cleaning, cooking, whatever, great. Have them develop. Have them really maximize time per like unit of work, right? Really allow them to go and crush at
Basically,
that.
do the 10,000 hour rule.
Exactly. Yeah.
Hone their skill.
Hone their skills even
Yep.
further. And no one has to be a master at anything. Yeah. No one has to be a jack of all trades. There can be specificity of labor, essentially, is what I'm saying. Huge benefits to playing nice with others, and huge detriments to not. Exile or getting killed in our sleep, or a fight that happens right then and something bad happens.
So just one thing, sorry. The one thing this makes me think of is one of the reasons why I think so many people have trouble holding on to their holding their truth. Because if we actually stand up for maybe our principles or morals or values or whatever it may be, right?
Yep.
Well, then now we're going against the tribe. Now we're a social, maybe a pariah. We're a free thinker, right? And now we're on the outs. So now we're maybe removed from the group. We lose our social circle. We are now alone and vulnerable. And again, this is something that, as a mentor and a coach, and you're taking this from a much more specific area. But for myself, with a lot of the people I work with, when it comes to mentoring, the big thing, and myself included, was not listening to my gut, was compromising, was crossing those lines that I had made. Well, I'm going to cross a line. Maybe I shouldn't, but I want to stay with these people. I want to still be accepted with these people. So you cross a line, you cross a line, you cross a line. And this is, again, this is a social stressor that we go through. Because, and why bullying has such a massive impact on this generation, especially, as you said, the past 10 years. When we were in high school, when we were in grade school, bullying stopped when we went home. But now, the bullying continues over social media. It's 24/7, 365. And now it's a constant barrage of that social stress. So anyways, I want you to continue. I just wanted to throw in a kind of something I've been listening and observing.
You're beating me to the punch here, because there's so many interesting implications to this. I also want to make it clear that I'm not talking about whether these things are good things or bad things. I'm not saying whether we should be really empathetic and we should really try to be nice to this group or that group. It completely depends on contexts. Whether something is good or bad, again, these are value functions here. That completely depends on context, completely depends on what's going on with you. What I'm trying to note is, this is how your brain works. And your brain is going to be throwing a hissy fit, to put it nicely, if certain things are not taken care of. Again, with the physiological domain, if you are not walking, a lot, many steps, if you're not exercising, your brain's going to, or your body's going to throw a hissy fit. Your brain's going to throw a hissy fit. There's going to be all kinds of issues downstream of it. So again, not saying whether it's a good or a bad thing, but what I am saying is, your brain needs social health and social so what am I trying to say? Social congruence, I suppose. Social health. Let's keep it simple. Another note, this is the huge one, is this is an explanation for human morality and ethics. It's why we feel bad when we do bad things. It's why rejection...
Conscience.
It's huge. This is the basis for it. Because our brain is quite literally going, this is bad for my survival. You can form a parallel here of, like, your brain sees a snake and it goes, oh, I don't want to be near that. Your brain thinks about, lashing out at other people or speaking up or telling somebody what's what, stealing from another person, hurting another person, taking from another person, or even just doing something that that the group does not like. Your brain will make you, at a subconscious level, averse to doing that, because these things go against the group. Our brain does not, generally speaking, does not like going against the group. It's why we can maybe rationally justify, at a conscious level, There's a huge distinction there. At a conscious level, this is some, mega corporation. Who cares if I steal a chocolate bar from them? And yet we'll feel guilty. Generally speaking, we'll feel guilty. We'll feel badly. And, maybe we justify taking it, but we don't, we'll definitely be less likely to tell other people that we did it. Because, being labeled as thief, as somebody who would steal, as somebody who can kind of pick and choose, what's good or what's bad, that's spooky to the group. And we generally don't like that. This is why rejection hurts like crazy. Even if we know that we have to reject the other person, because that's what's, right or wrong, whether it's in a romantic situation or a friendship situation or a work situation. And it's why rejection oftentimes, not always, there's a spectrum here, but it hurts so badly when we're rejected because, oh shit, they don't like me. I'm outside the group and that's not good. It's why hurting other people is, there's so many times where we'll say, oh, I should have spoke up. I should have said something. But why didn't I? Your brain does not want you to go against the group. It does not. Well, I shouldn't say that necessarily. I should choose my words a little bit more carefully. Your brain does not want you to do something that would be bad for your status in the group, for your social health. Now, let's talk about that word I was saying, status in the group, because this is where things get very, very interesting and very, very fun, I think, at least. We're talking about social health here. So this is where things differ massively for men and women. And I specialize in working with men. This podcast has a lot of male listeners, so I talk about the men side of things.
Please.
Men, from an evolutionary perspective, I want to choose my words very carefully here. I'm not talking about my values. I'm not trying to espouse my values at all here. I'm trying to get over that bias, in fact, with this talk. From an evolutionary perspective, generally speaking, as well, again, your brain, you have the value of what you provide, of what you give, of what you have. And the way that I put it simplistically is children, think about the small group, right? Small tribe, 80 people, 100 people. You've known these people your entire life. There are no other people around. You don't know of other groups, of other tribes, because it doesn't make sense. Actually, let me expand on that before I get to this next piece. You would never move around. It's the same people your entire life, forever, until you die or until they die. There is no towns or villages. You might know of a group that's far, far, far away, but you wouldn't be that close because you're all trying to compete for resources. You're all trying to survive. We would not move around, generally speaking. We would not be nomadic unless there was a reason to do so, because there's so much benefit to knowing where the berries and the good stuff and what animals are here and where the bad stuff and the scary stuff and the weather is like here. It's so beneficial to stay in the same place. So from an evolutionary perspective, we would stay in the same place, the exact same people, and we generally lived with them. When a group would get larger and larger, too big to support itself with the resources around, then they might split up. Then they might, move elsewhere and, propagate or progenate or whatever. Then they would split up. But again, they would move so far away that there wouldn't be, it's not like there's roads. It's not like there's generally like long distance trails. We would be competing for the same resources. So generally speaking, we'd be with the same people our entire lives. And what those people thought of us mattered. And that's a good segue to what I was trying to talk about here, which is men have the value of what they provide, of what they give. This is what your subconscious is saying, not what I'm saying. These aren't my values. This is how your brain works. Children, they get to eat for free. When times get hard, when there's a winter, when, there's issues going on, children get to eat for free. They get a free pass. Women, generally speaking, they get to eat for free too. We take care of them. We like them. And guys are the ones who are generally doing the things. We're the ones hunting. Guys are the all-terrain vehicles of like physiology. We heal a lot faster. We can deal with more adversity, especially physiologically, or that's what I'm talking about, physiologically. We're bigger, we're stronger, we're able to just do more. That's why we would do more. That's why we would hunt. That's why we would go out. That's why we would war when that became more of a prominent thing. But again, that's more recent history, generally speaking. So women generally get to eat for free too, unless they're causing too much of a problem, right? For the group, for the tribe. And then just like men, they get ousted. Men, when times are good, more hands on deck. We're able to do more work, more effort, more labor. When times are trim, when there's not enough to go around, the sexual competition that you present which normally was fine because there's so much good stuff to go around, now it becomes more clear. Your necessity for resources like food becomes more outweighed by, well, why aren't you contributing enough? Plus, I want to survive. I want to live. So who gets to eat and who doesn't? Now, this is fun. This is an explanation for self-esteem at one level, at an evolutionary level, because there's experiential stuff and stuff that we learn that goes on top of this, but this forms a basis for self-esteem. What would give you status in the group? What would give you status evolutionarily, right? What would give you security in the group, I should be saying, is how many resources have we stockpiled? How much wealth do we hold? Right? This is why you, modern times, feel good when you've got a nice new shirt on, nice chain, nice watch, nice clothes, nice car. We get to flex that stuff. We get to flex that wealth. Other guys like it, and women generally like it. And you're going to find that relationship is very tied. We like it because women like it because we like it, but it all ties down to survival. So the amount of goods that we have, the amount of wealth we have is huge. The skills that we have are huge. So, if we can do cool stuff, if we can do stuff that's like really geared to survival, we'll feel like the big dog. We'll feel great. And women generally like this too. Guys generally like this as well. And you see carryover to skills that don't seem to matter too much evolutionarily. The example I'll give is, imagine a guy at a much more nerdy, geekier fellow. And I'm a pretty nerdy guy myself, so I'm not talking any shit. He's at a trading card kind of place where you play games, right? And in his normal life, he might have very low self-esteem. He might be very, like the stereotype you might be imagining. But in that domain, where he might be the best at that game, he carries himself differently. He might be more bold. He might say, I feel more confident when I'm there, or I feel more comfortable. And yeah, because they're all tied together. It's all the same stuff. There he might be bold, saying whatever he wants and acting like the big dog. But as soon as he leaves there, he goes back into this other version of himself. Self-esteem, all tied to self-esteem. Other things. Here's a fun one. I should have noted this first because it's big for men, especially. Being big and strong. Oh my God. Being big and strong means other people can't screw with you. Every guy wants to be big and strong and more muscular. Note, when you're passing by someone at the gym and they're, 6'5", 350 pounds or bigger, how do you treat them? How do you defer to them? Say you bump into them. You might say, oh, my bad, big guy, or hey, sorry, that's on me, no problem. And we're just nice. There's doesn't have to be deeper levels to it. It's not like we're like, oh, and why is it? Don't worry about that stuff. That's just how we behave at a baseline. Now, someone a lot smaller, 5 foot tall, 100 pounds, what happens when we bump into them? We're not as, I don't want to say kind, because it's not about kindness. We just don't treat them the same way.
Well, there's not a threat.
There's not a threat.
I mean, you're literally talking about how the prison yard works.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, that was my life when you walk in, and this is why for a long time I relied on physical strength. So even prior to going into prison, I was a doorman and I did collections for, let's say, some not so reputable people. If I showed up at your doorstep, probably wasn't a good thing. And because I needed to look a certain way and do certain things, I abused a lot of steroids and went from being, I would say I was probably a decently nice guy when I was young growing up to being a not so nice person, right? In order to do the things that was required of me to do. And I carried that into prison. Right now I realized that, hey, good thing I'm the way I am, because here, physical stature, being a big guy matters, because it's all proving in the yard. When you go into the yard, how strong are you? What can you do? How physically imposing are you, right? It's that masculine energy, right? Kind of, look at me, look how strong I am, look what I'm capable of doing. Don't mess with me. The funny thing is that is such for myself, I relied on that for so long until I realized it was nothing. And that all changed the day I was sentenced. Because my physical strength, it amounted to nothing here. So it's just interesting, you're talking about something that I really can relate to, because it was my biggest focus for the long time. When I was a small kind of scrawny, weak guy.
Mhm.
I was bullied and then went to
Yep.
the gym. I wanted to change that. So now people started to treat me different.
Mhm.
And then I started to change my, let's say, internal dialogue. My identity started to change.
Mhm.
And all of that started to change. And sometimes we don't even realize that it's changing. It's just the environment that we're in. It shapes us. So, anyways, don't want to digress too much, but
No,
I
it's
just,
a
it was
great
interesting you
example.
saying this and how I felt about it right away.
It's just everything starts to click when you look at things from an evolutionary perspective. And it's going to get even more so because even now I'm in more esoteric domains, just gets better and better, I like to say. So being big and strong makes you feel more secure. And then there's a tie-in to what do people who have none of these things look like? And how do they behave? We'll get there. Other things that lead to self-esteem and security. Remember, we're talking about self-esteem because that's security in the group. That's value to the group. Being big and strong means you can defend more. You can take care of other agents. You can handle the bad stuff. So we like that. This is also why, again, all these things are going to be what women like in men as well. The big ties there. Other things that lead to positive self-esteem is our social relationships. If we're liked by everybody, if we've got especially other guys that we're very close with, we feel like the king. We feel so secure. I've got a gang here. Doesn't matter if and you're going to form even more connections here. Doesn't matter if I'm, smaller or weaker or just haven't had time to put on muscle. I've got these guys who love me and who take care of me. I'm secure here. I'm safe. I've got my boys. That's safety in numbers. So, fun example to showcase, again, this subconscious feeling of security, of self-esteem. Imagine a 16-year-old boy. You will never find, generally speaking, someone with poorer self-esteem at this level than a 16, 17, 18-year-old boy. Because they're no longer a child where they get free pass, they get to eat for free. They've been thrust into the domain of adulthood, adult manhood, but they don't have any of this stuff that we've talked about. They haven't had time to accrue wealth. They haven't had time, well, they quite literally have not physically matured yet or had time to build muscle, do not have strong social relationships yet, and they don't have good self-esteem, or excuse me, they don't have any skills that they've developed, and therefore they
And
don't have good
self-esteem, I
self-esteem.
can relate to that at that age. Oh my
Yeah,
God, my self-esteem
who
was
can't?
non-existent.
Yep, who can't? The example I love is, and I work with some younger guys every once in a while, 16, 17, 18, 19 years old. And when they start to do these things, when, I'll have clients who say, I'm miserable. I'm so anxious. I'm so depressed. I feel so badly. My self-esteem is so terrible. And then what change? And look at how look at what changes in them when they get a job, when they get a girlfriend. I should note, it's nice to have a girlfriend. It's a security thing. That's passing on genes. That's a nice relationship forming. That gives us security and wealth as well, right? What happens when they get how do they feel when they have a nice chain on or a nice new car? How do they feel when they get bigger and stronger? An example that I love here is, you have one 16-year-old walking down the street, and how do they act? They're meek, and then they bump into somebody. Oh, I'm sorry. And then you get 5 or 6 of those guys walking down the street together, and they're the biggest assholes in the world. They're so rude. They're so crude. They're like starting shit with random passersby. They're bold like crazy. Again, those changing on a dime things that occur when, we're taking care of stressors or stressors are impacting us. So social health, and I know I spent quite a bit of time talking about it because you need to. A lot of people aren't aware of it. This is the explanation for ethics and morals, why we feel bad when we do bad stuff or bad stuff happens to us. It's why rejection or being ousted from the group or doing stuff that we know other people don't like and other people might judge us for can really screw with us and can really make us feel, and note this language, insecure. We are quite literally insecure from an evolutionary perspective. We lack security. And again, look at how things feel when we get compliments. Other people saying, "Oh, wow, that's really cool." And it doesn't matter if we're juggling or whatever, something that might have no real impact on survival. Somebody thinks this cool. That's cool. My relationship with them just got better, Or when somebody
Validation
goes,
is huge.
yeah,
Validation
it's
it's
massive.
so important. I mean, what's that term? I did it for the gram,
Exactly.
right? I did it for Instagram. I did it for the likes.
Well, there's another line that I love this line, one of my favorites, and I talked about it in the previous episode is, if you ever want to find pathology, look at the intersection between our innate psychology and physiology and technology. So we have these innate, like, I want to be accepted, I want to be in the group. But now the group isn't just the people you see every day, it's everyone on social
It's
media and everything else.
worldwide almost.
Exactly. And we
It's huge.
can't, plus we're sending so much signal out and not receiving a lot of signal back. But when we do, likes or comments or hearts and all this other stuff, that's when, and we feel good about that. Yeah. And this is even worse. A lot of these factors, the social domain is a lot more, but differently, impacting women. But that's a whole other domain, and I'm not going to be talking about it today, unfortunately. Men, we have restrictions on us, a lot of them. And women do too, but ours, well, I can relate to them at least, and of course clients can, of course listeners can as well. So the social, the reason why our brain treats it so importantly is because it quite literally can be survival. It is our self-esteem, our self-concept. It is our ability to behave freely and do what we want. Yeah. When we when we don't have these things that lead to good self-esteem, how do we feel? We feel like we have no movement. We feel like we're hyper attentive to what everyone might be saying. We're anxious about everything because, yeah, everything can impact us more deeply. At least that's what our brain would be telling us. Again, I know our current context has changed. We live in modern times where a lot of these things don't matter. Your brain doesn't know that, and it does not care, which I'll be getting into shortly. That's the trouble of it. We have these monkey brains that are living in modern times, and we can't move past those heuristics. Maybe, and I'm not saying this is a good thing, but until we have things like CBIs or computer brain interfaces, until they're actually, I'm not saying this is good, until we can actually start to change the brain's architecture, which I can't even imagine how complex that is, and I can't imagine that's happening anytime soon. We're not going to be able to escape these things. We still need to walk. We still need to move. We still need to have close relationships. We still need to have community. You still need boyfriends and girlfriends, whether I'm talking to, whatever kind of listener here. We need those relationships, or our brain is going to think that we are dying, that we are not doing well, that our survival is at risk. So, first big pivot here. And this is where I use my hands a lot. I'm going to try to do a decent job of explaining it, what I'm drawing out here. So this is all about stress. We're talking about stress here. There are two axes I want to describe here. I'm drawing a bar graph effectively. There are two bars. One of them is going to be stress. And this is just how stressed out we are at any given time. This is to say, how many resources are we exerting? How much things are on our mind? And how many physiological issues am I having to deal with and change? Again, stressors are not going to be things that feel good or feel bad. It's irrelevant. A vacation is something that we love, feels great, but God, is it stressful? And that's why we say things like, I need a vacation from my vacation. Yeah, because we just blew ourselves out. We go to, I say Paris, but I'd like to name a nice city. We go to a nice, some nice big city, and we are looking at all the beautiful architecture. We're looking at all the cool things, all the cool people. We're information overload. And what's more is we're walking almost all day, exerting a lot of physiological resources. We would say stress is so high there, and it is, but we love it. We keep wanting to go on vacations. Again, whether it's good for us or bad for us, whether it's something we enjoy or whether we don't enjoy it, that's irrelevant for what I'm talking about here and for how your brain works. Whether it costs you resources is what I'm talking about. On the other bar, on the other axis here, I want to talk about something called self-care.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know there's, just like with stress, there's a lot of colloquial definitions for what self-care is, and I want to define what we're talking about here. Self-care is going to be, it's not just the antithesis to stress. It's going to be the things that our brain has learned to like. It's going to be the things that are good for our survival. Let me say that the other way around, in fact. Self-care is going to be the things that are good for our survival, typically. But it's also going to be things that our brain has learned to like or intrinsically likes. So this is going to be things like stimulation, general stimulation. This is going to be things like calories. This is going to be things like social reward. So what do we find in self-care? We do find things like good night's sleep, a little bit of exercise, spending time with friends and family, spending time out in nature, nice new meals, or looking at cool things on our phone. Again, a lot of things that take care of our body, a lot of things that are good for us, typically. But we're also going to be finding things that our brain really likes, like things like sex and porn, things like too much food, things like alcohol, things like drugs, things like gambling, things like too much technology use, the big six. These are things that we often get addicted to. So
Mm.
again, self-care, it's not for this bar that I'm drawing here. Self-care is not going to be things that are good for us or bad for us, and it's not going to be things that we like or that we dislike. It's going to be again, a little bit of a complex definition here, but I don't make the rules. It's going to be the things that our brain likes, that is good for survival. And what your brain likes, again, and actually, let me make a distinction here. I'm not talking about what you like. I'm talking at a subconscious level, the hardware here. What are we designed to like? What is intrinsically good for our survival from like your brain's understanding from an evolutionary perspective? Again, sleep, diet, exercise, spending time with family, spending time out in nature, cool little stimulating things like games and whatnot. And then all the nice modern stuff that we have that causes a lot of problems here. So what are the implications? This bar graph that or these axes that I'm drawing here is going to be the foundation for understanding why we get anxious, why we get depressed, why we have compulsive behavior, etc. So when these bars are like this, actually, let me back up a little bit here. These bars are constantly in flux, right? We're going through a divorce and, the stress bar shoots up like crazy and maybe the self-care bar goes down a little bit because, we're just missing out on a lot of things. Say we're really busy at work, that's a better example perhaps. Stress goes up and self-care goes down because we just have more time
It's
that
the
we're
way it
spending.
always is. Every client.
Exactly.
It's always going to be the first thing that's going to go is going to be your self-care. We're always going to
Exactly.
justify it too, right? The promises we make to ourselves,
hmm
we'll break those before we break a promise to someone else. And it's always self-care that takes the first hit. I won't go to the gym today. Well, I didn't have time to meal prep, so I'm gonna eat shit. You know what? I slept in, so I'm just gonna run out the door with my coffee, and there goes my morning. You didn't win the morning, so now you lose the day.
Wait till you hear these implications. This is
Let's
where
hear it.
things get pretty crazy. So when stress is like this, or 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 like this. That's to say, for our listeners here, when stress is higher than self-care. And again, I know I'm drawing an arbitrary kind of line here. When do we know if it's higher than self-care, and how do we? Bear with me; it'll get a lot clearer. When stress is higher than self-care, well, this means we're spending too many resources. Remember, stressors are spending resources, time, energy, and attention. So when stress is higher than self-care, we're exerting too many resources. And if nothing changes in our life, that deficit, because we're running a deficit, we're spending more than we have coming in effectively, that will get worse and worse and worse and worse. And your brain hates that. Your brain hates being in a deficit, and it has very little tolerance for it. So what your brain tries to do is one of two things. Either it wants to reduce stressors, that's to say it wants to reduce your output, or it wants to increase self-care. Now, what does this really look like? This is the explanation for why we get depressed, why we get anxious, why we have compulsive behavior issues and addictions issues, why we have avoidant behavior issues like procrastination, why we get reactive and snap at other people. This is also an explanation for dissociative behaviors typically, as well as psychotic behaviors, even behavioral psychotic behavior. Not always, but oftentimes. You cannot understand these behaviors and why they occur until you understand stress. And, I know it's become ubiquitous kind of well, maybe not ubiquitous, but it's become very common in the zeitgeist to say, oh, we're too stressed out. No one understands what that means. No one understands what a stressor is. People look at some activities like, scrolling through our phone. We'll be like, yeah, I want to. I know it's bad for me, but I keep doing it. And they can't understand it. And this is the key for
You
understanding
know,
it.
you know what's crazy? That like social media, I think since I came out of prison, it's like a whole new world for me that opened up,
Yeah,
right? I've put limiters now, blockers on my phone to manage my screen time. And I'll tell you, since I did that, my stress has gone way down
of course. We're seeing
because
things
that
that are,
that that negative information, that overload, because that's the thing about social media, right? You might see a good post. Oh, I feel great. But then you see another one where it's like, well, we're at war and gas prices and oil prices and this. So all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God. And what's that going to cost to fill up my truck now? What's going to happen, right? And we start stressing, being anxious about the future that hasn't happened yet. So it's a roller coaster of emotion. Like you said, stress goes up, self-care goes down, right? And well, I need to scroll more. But now we're getting a negative.
Your brain doesn't know. Yeah.
No.
Your brain doesn't know what it's getting. And
it's just our default pattern. Scroll, drink, smoke. All self-care and majority of our self-care is dog shit. It is horrible.
Yeah. I had not to jump too far ahead here, but I had a client who he had some major exams at play. He was under so many stressors. He had a gambling and cocaine addiction as well. And so stressors, let's unpack this a little bit. He was under so much stress. He was working all these different jobs. He had to study for exams. Things weren't going well with the girlfriend. He had massive debt from the gambling addiction. He kept observing himself engage in these behaviors over and over, and he didn't understand why. So that's incredibly stressful. The confusion, the processing that occurs with it. And I asked him to, and this is homework that I often give after the first session with clients, is I need you to make an inventory of your stressors. Where are your resources going? What are you thinking about over and over and over again? What are you anxious about? What are you worrying about? And also, do you have any physiological stuff going on? In fact, digression in a digression, when they're cutting, food is a huge aspect of our self-care. So when you're cutting and you've cut out like massive elements of that self-care, and therefore you're in a caloric deficit, so that's quite stressful as well. It works on both axes. What do they exhibit? They're tired all the time. They have no energy. They have no motivation. Depression symptoms. They often get a little bit neurotic, a little bit more anxious, a little bit more sensitive. Anxiety symptoms. They just get snappy and pissy. They're mean, a lot of the time when they have enough energy to be. This is reactivity. And the bad habits, and it's not only the bad habits, compulsive behaviors when your brain pushes you to engage in any behavior. They get pushed to smoke more, to drink more, to do bad shit, to engage in, if they have the energy, although your brain will often shut down libido, maybe more pornography or just staring at your phone like a zombie. Your brain is trying to reduce stress in any way that it can and increase self-care in any way that it can. So I talk with clients all the time that, somebody who's in a major caloric deficit, like bodybuilders in prep, they have all of these symptoms. Just not that it's anything special. It's just they are under immense, effectively, stress is just so much higher than self-care there. It's like this is the explanation for all of these behaviors and forms the basis of understanding more complex things, like why we form beliefs or how we form beliefs and, how our brain forms patterns between different variables and how it leads to more complex behavior. But for these simplistic things, this is everything. So a little bit more on this relationship. The worse this deficit gets, the worse your brain pushes for these behavioral responses. Like again, your brain quite literally changes the way that you think, the way that you see things, whether you feel like you can do anything or not. It changes your behavior, your cognition, your feelings and emotions. Your brain is trying to push you in different directions, again, through depression, anxiety, compulsive behavior, avoidant behavior, reactivity, etc. So the worse we get, for the listeners, the higher our stress gets or the lower our self-care gets, that relative relationship between these two.
So basically, the more of an imbalance.
The more of an imbalance, the more of the disparity.
So the higher that stress and the lower the self-care.
Exactly. The stronger your brain is going to push for these things. So very quick example to talk about depression. To talk about depression a little bit, this is an oversimplification. I'm jumping ahead quite a bit, but
good, though.
When there's some days where we get a little bit of poorer sleep, or the girlfriend, we have an argument with the girlfriend, or we've just been maybe we're dieting as well. We might say that's a little bit, stress is getting a little bit higher than self-care. What does the brain do there for depression only? We're keeping it very specific here. You might feel a little tired. You might feel it's hard to get out of bed. It's harder to use your head with what you're doing. The motivation just isn't there. It's hard to be positive. Your brain's not letting it be a rewarding thing. Again, if you're stressed out, if you're too stressed out, if stress is too high relative to self-care, your brain is not going to let things be rewarding largely because it doesn't want you to keep doing those things. It wants you to sit down and do nothing. And if we push a little bit more, we still do these things that we really need to do. So the disparity gets even worse. Our brain makes even more severe symptoms. Now we have to like drag ourselves out of bed. We start to think, maybe I'll just call off work, or I don't want to go. We start to just shut down and stop reaching out to other people. Again, our brain is trying to make us not do anything. We might go to work, but when we get home, we have to cancel plans. We just order food in because we don't have the energy to cook. We feel like we don't have the energy to cook. And say we push past that. We don't allow our brain to shut us down. And I understand, we can't shut down all the time. We have work, we have jobs, we have responsibilities. I get it. But our brain, this is what our brain wants. If we push past further than that, that's when we might hit levels of burnout where you just can't. I just can't do this. And you might have more severe symptoms, panic attacks, anxiety starts to go haywire, but the depressive symptoms, to be specific on that, get really wild. So, stress is everything. And this relationship between stress and self-care is massive. This is normally where I cut off the first session with clients. But today I really want to talk about another piece, which I usually start off with in the second session with clients. But to frame where we're at now, that I would be working with a client, I would want them understanding where is their stress. And I also want them to understand self-care. Also, I'm remembering now with my client with all these stressors and the exams and all this other stuff. God, I'm all over the place here. To finish up that example, his stress was extremely high, right? And his self-care, I asked him about his self-care and he said, well, it's gambling and cocaine. I said, well, we're trying to remove those. You're going to see all of those behavioral symptoms get so much worse. Your anxiety, your depression, your compulsive, you're not going to be able to quit those things because your brain's going to be screaming Bloody Mary.
That's like just trying to put out a fire with gasoline.
Exactly. You just can't.
Like you're using the wrong fluid.
Yeah.
You're using literally what's making it worse.
Yep, exactly. But until you understand,
that's what's insane, but it's what we do.
It's what
right. It's like people dealing with stress. Well, I'm going to drink. Okay. Yeah. Let's do something that's horrible for you.
Can't fault the ignorant, man. The amount of people who still drink a little bit to benefit their sleep, even though
smoke weed. The one I get all the time. I smoke weed to sleep better. Oh, you mean you smoke weed to have horrible sleep?
Yeah. Yeah.
This is why you're always tired. And this is why you have a caffeine addiction. And this is why you're like, it's so funny how psychology and the things I deal with coaching with my clients all the time.
It's the same stuff.
You've given so much to client, like to even just myself.
Mm-hmm.
I feel so benefited from listening to you for the past little over an hour.
Yeah.
So I'm sure everyone right now is getting a lot of insight into their behavioral issues.
Sure.
I mean,
tip of the iceberg, man. Tip of the iceberg. I really want to get to this.
Absolutely. But even if it's a tip of the iceberg, this is a tip we rarely ever get to see from a professional standpoint.
Yeah. Well, that's the other issue.
Wow.
Thank you.
And thank you. So guys, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of call this the part one. Or sorry, do you have something you want to add?
I would love to, if we could have another 20 minutes or so, I'd love to talk about that first piece. That sets us up beautifully for the second.
Okay, sure. Let's do it. 20 more minutes.
Perfect.
Why not?
Gorgeous. So stressors, everything, super important. And it's what your brain runs on. And I keep using this language of the brain, but we have to define what that is and how it works. So this is, I feel like I want to close things up on that previous piece. Again, stressors, I usually ask clients at this point, start to see your stressors, start to better understand them, start to think about what is impacting me, because we need to reduce those. Now, stressors, the way that we see things, the way that we feel about certain things, the heuristics that we placed onto certain variables, this can be a lot of stress as well. I'll often have clients at the end of this first session say, I don't have anxiety, or I'm not that stressed out. And I go, that's nonsense. Keep thinking about it. And then the next session they come to, you know what? I do think about my kids a lot, or, I do worry about work a lot. And I'm like, exactly. You just weren't seeing them. And there's immense complexity to it. And I need them practicing that. I usually expand. So the next big model that I want to talk about here, which is another one that is key to understanding anxiety, depression, compulsive behavior, and is where, after this, that's perhaps exactly where we'll go to. Why do these occur and what can we do about them? You need to understand that there is a dichotomy to your psychology. There are two distinct parts, and they both have a hand on the steering wheel that is how you think how you feel, what you do. Your motivational processes, the way that you think and view yourself, they're two different parts. And, I have very little patience for the woo-woo stuff. So I'm going to be able to explain how this works with the neuroanatomy of your brain. And again, I'm going to be defining all these examples because, just like I'd be working with my clients, I need you, or you need you, to understand what we're talking about comprehensively to be able to do anything about it. So these two different parts, they work completely differently. This isn't apples and oranges. This is like apples to dogs. This is like plants to animals. They work so differently. So the two different parts that we're going to be defining are the mind and the brain. These are the labels that I use. Other terminology we can use for the mind could be the conscious aspect of ourselves, the thinking, the critical part, the id for Freudians out there. And how I like to define it is it's thinking, it's critical, it has personality, and what's more, and this is what makes it so intuitive, it is you. It is the thinking part, the you. I've been using this language a lot, subconscious and conscious. The mind is the conscious part, and I'm always going to be using this side of the screen for the watchers here. This is the mind, and this is the brain, right? So the mind, again, I repeat a lot, right? The mind is the part that thinks critically. The mind is you. It's your conscious part. Like, this is you. This is the agent that is you. And we're
So
would
that be kind of like our conditioning, how we've conditioned ourselves?
No, conditioning is a very complex term here.
I don't want to over.
No. Conditioning.
I'm just
worry
curious for myself. This is just me just asking, but okay, our mind.
This is
continue.
Yeah. For now, what I'll say is the mind is the part of you that thinks critically. It contextualizes. It thinks about the future. It thinks about the past. It goes, what about this and what about this? It uses different parts of data. That's you. How you think is how the mind thinks. This is you. And I'm done with talking about the mind. That's all I need to talk about. In fact, the next 20 minutes that I talk is all about the brain and how this part works. Because this is the part that we don't understand. This is the part that I've just explained is responsible for our self-esteem, for why our behavior changes so readily, for anxiety, depression, compulsive behavior, avoidant behavior, reactivity, all that stuff. That's about the brain. And that's what I need to talk about more than anything. So what I'm going to note with the brain, and actually, let me say something else first. Normally, I'd have a picture that I present to clients, like a little link, but I'll describe it for all the listeners as well. It showcases, the evolution of brains over time. So you start with fish. There's a shark's brain there, and then you go to amphibians, then to reptiles, then there's a cat's brain, and then there's a human's brain. And you see how our brains, the neuroanatomy of this, the different sub parts of the brain have changed and evolved over time. And when you look at lesser evolved brains like reptiles, amphibians, and especially sharks, their brains have like a whole bunch of little nodules and something. They look like a lumpy whatever. They look like an organ rather than a digestive organ rather than a brain. And they all have their individual parts. Particularly, though, with lesser evolved brains, you'll see that the cerebrum, or with, we could also call the cerebral cortex, which is in human brains, that big gray wrinkly part that looks like the entire brain, which is really the outer inch or inch and a half, the gray matter. With lesser evolved animals, they've got virtually none of it. Their cerebrums are generally, let's say 20 or 10% of the brain size or brain mass, very roughly speaking, right? And then as we've gotten more and more evolved, the brain has, let's say, largely stayed the same relative to the development of the cerebrum. And what you see is the cerebrum gets larger and larger over time, and it starts to get wrinkly as well. Why are our brains wrinkly? Very simple. We ran out of space in our skulls. Our brains got too big. And the wrinkles are so that we can increase surface area. So all the gyri and sulci of the brain, the wrinkles that are there, that's quite literally just so we can have more connections, more density. There's the term used colloquially, smooth brain. Are you familiar?
Yes.
Smooth brain. Yeah, it's for somebody who's dumber. Generally speaking, it's because their brain just doesn't have enough complexity. But this is.
I just got a new way to insult somebody from a more sophisticated standpoint. You got a
smooth
brain.
The young fellas have been saying this stuff for the last few years. So where was I going with this? Oh yeah. So what you've seen is the cerebrum, the cerebral cortex. This is what's changed over time. And I want to note here that the cerebrum, and the neuroanatomists the neuroanatomist listeners here are going to roll their eyes. Let's say that's the mind. That's their consciousness. And a few examples to showcase this: head trauma, CTE, or like major like concussions over and over again. What's getting damaged? That's that wrinkly part of the brain. That's the cerebrum. And what do you see from people who have these head traumas from CTE? They become less of who they were. Their personality fades and they become more reactive. They do more of that animal kind of behavior. Plus their finer motor functions and more complex pieces like speech and making associations goes to shit. They become dumber, unfortunately, and they lose their self, we'll say. That's because the cerebrum is getting damaged. The mind is getting damaged. What's more, lobotomies, trust medical science. Don't forget, lobotomies were only, 50, 60 years ago. Crazy business, all of that. 50, 60 years ago or so, they were putting ice picks through the, ocular socket of a person, piercing into the brain, but only into the mind, the cerebrum, and ablating the brain, essentially scrambling it around. They were just wiggling a spike around. And what this would do would destroy part of the cerebrum. What you would see from people who got lobotomies is they become generally, and there's a lot of variety on here because you're just destroying a part of the brain, they would lose their personality massively, largely. They become a shell of themselves. They can't think as well. And for women especially, they might just be more happy to sit around and do nothing. And for guys, sometimes they become more like a vegetable, but oftentimes they would just get more reactive and more pissy and more angry, which we're going to note why that might be when we define the brain. So what I want to note here is two distinct parts. The mind, largely found in the cerebrum, cerebral cortex. And the brain, we're going to say, for what I'm defining, the brain is everything else. Now, again, these are both parts, the mind and the brain, both part of the anatomical brain. I know that. But they're two distinct parts and they work completely differently. So let's define how the brain works. I'm going to repeat myself like crazy here because there are three major aspects to it. And none of this is intuitive. So listen up effectively. This is why I repeat myself. Again, the mind is super intuitive because that's you. That's how you think. You're this guy. You're that driver's seat. You're in that driver's seat. The brain is not. It works in the subconscious and it works very differently. Both the mind and the brain have connections to all of our sensors. Yeah? Our touch, our smell, our taste, our vision and our hearing and all this other stuff. Those are sensors that we have that take in data and information. But what these two parts of your brain, the mind and the brain, do with it is completely different. So the brain, how does it work? Your brain, and I use very strong words here because I really want to make a clear definition or a clear distinction more than anything. The brain is like a box of wires. It does not care. It does not think. It is just a robot, effectively, wanting to survive. And it does so in very simplistic ways. I used that metaphor earlier on, the mind is like the human and the brain is like a horse. I was only doing that to show relative strength. Because again, your brain is not a thinking agent. It does not consider. It is not like we have a devil on our shoulders going, what should I do? It just does the things that it is programmed to do. So let's expand on that. Your brain is like a box of wires. Why do I say this? Your brain is constantly forming associations, and that's all it's doing. In fact, nowadays my job here has gotten a lot easier with the advent of AI and LLMs because this showcases how the brain works pretty well. Your brain, just like LLMs, are just making large language models, are just forming a bunch of little associations. These letters go with these letters and these words go with these words. And when you have trillions and quadrillions and even more associations and complexity, it starts to look like something. It starts to look like it can do certain stuff. So your brain has a lot of that evolutionary stuff that's just, in our DNA, effectively, hardware. But The software, which is what I'm largely talking about now, is where your brain just makes a whole bunch of different associations. And in fact, I'm going to go through a bunch of examples. And one first one I really like here is, I can come into my office and sit at my desk, and I'm aware that something is off, but I don't know what it is. What's going on there, between the mind and the brain? My brain has alerted me automatically. It's like a sixth sense, or like that spidey sense, what's going on? And then I rationally, I observe and I go, yeah, what is going on? I'm consciously thinking, what's different here? And after a few seconds of processing, I can go, oh, you know what? My notepad is usually on this side of my desk rather than on this side of my desk. Why would that be? And I start to consciously reason. I start to go, well, why would that be? And I rationally can come to conclusions of, maybe somebody else was at my desk and moved this over, or did I move it over, or what happened there? The brain is not thinking. It is not rational. It is not considering. It is just going, what is associated where? It's the thing that noted that something was different. It's the thing that helps us catch the bowl when it falls off the thing before we even notice it, before we even see it. It's that spidey sense of, this is off, this is weird. It's the thing that detects uncanny valley and all that other stuff.
So would that be the reactive?
Yes, that's what we're getting.
Like reacting, right?
That's where we're getting. Yeah. So reactivity, especially, which those are two different words, reacting and reactivity, it's responsible for both of those things. There's a line that I'll get to later, which is, if it's not us, rationally, consciously, your mind, you choosing to do something, the only other guy in town is the brain. So we want to be asking, where did my brain learn this? Why would it be doing this? What the hell do I do about this? So to continue with the brain, your brain just forms associations. What do I mean by this? Things that are proximally close to one another, things that are related, things that are going on at the same time, those get lumped together. Now I have a bunch of examples to showcase this, because examples really teach here. Another thing to note is your brain is like a hard drive that is constantly storing these associations. They get logged. They're in the background there. Let's go to some examples that really showcase this stuff. Associations on like a hard drive. Go ahead.
Can I, just something that I've always said to my clients, and I'm wondering if this kind of relates. We are responsible for our second thought and first action. Whereas our first thought would be the reaction, right? Why we get angry and we're like, well, that guy cut me off and I'm going to punch him in the stupid face, and what that initial one. And that's where it's like, where I always tell my clients, there's a space. There's a very small space between that first thought, that reaction, and then before we do our second thought and how we actually act, right? Our first action. Is this kind of like what we're talking about?
So what I would say to that is, your brain is the thing doing the action, the reaction, and it is you observing it, or observing the impulse to do it. Your mind, observing it, or the want to do it, or that you have done it, and then you have something else to say about it. So of course we're responsible for our actions. It's anarchy outside of that. But while we're responsible, we're not necessarily in control of them, and that's the trouble. If we had control of them, we wouldn't have behavioral issues. No one would, we wouldn't need therapists. So we're not in control of them, but we can learn. And this is a line I hope I would remember to say later on. You have to learn how your brain works to be able to take care of it. You have to learn how it makes associations to be the shepherd of it. It is doing the things that it's doing, whether it's creating cognition, feelings, behaviors, for a reason. So if you don't understand those reasons, you're not going to be able to do anything about them. Why we would snap at other people, why we get sad, whatever happens at a subconscious level, it's our brain. So we need to understand that stuff. And let's look at some examples. So one great one is, you've got a guy who, well, actually, let's do some simple ones first. You sometimes smell certain smells, and it transports you right back to that time that you smelled it when you were 6 years old, 10 years old, 12 years old. Why? Associative memory. Quite literally, your brain just has a very strong association between that smell and that context. And there's some neuroanatomy here where the olfactory bulb, which is responsible for smells, very, very close proximally to the memory center of the brain. I think it's the amygdala. So that's why smells can really impact us, which is so silly to smells,
When
but
my wife makes homemade bread,
yeah,
I'm transported back to when I was like a kid and my grandmother made it. Like it's the most comforting smell
oh yeah,
in the world for me.
100%. So even more complex examples, we can be at say we're at a mall with our girlfriend and there's, AC/DC's Thunderstruck playing on the PA system. And then our girlfriend breaks up with us. And it's so painful and it's so terrible. There's a social rupture happening. A relationship was really important. That's social stressor, massive social stressor occurring. And it's so painful. And our brain likes to make associations. Your brain wants to make especially strong associations for stressors. The bigger the stressor, the stronger the association, the more likely that is to pop up. So, 6 months might pass by and whenever we might hear AC/DC's Thunderstruck, and it puts us right back into the mood. It makes us think about our ex-girlfriend. It makes us, we could be having a good time and now we're all bummed out and sad and all kinds of other issues, maybe angry, and maybe we want to drink now. Associative
This is
memory.
sorry, this is crazy because there was an album I loved when I was in remand, when I was waiting to get sentenced to life in prison.
Mm-hmm.
I listened to this album on repeat.
Yeah.
And I love the song. It was an Armin van Buuren album. It made me feel good. It was like the one good thing I had when I was in there. When I got sentenced and I went to maximum security, I wanted that album. Now the funny thing is, I put that album on. It wasn't until about a year ago I could re-listen to that album because every time I heard that when I was in Max, I got enraged.
Yep.
It went from being my favorite album
Mm-hmm.
to being one I literally couldn't even put on.
Mm-hmm. So look at a
And
note
now
that
it's crazy. It makes so much sense
oh,
why it
I got
triggered
more.
such
I
a
got more.
reaction.
But look at what you noted. It took a year before I could watch that. Well, why would it change over a year? And what you did, I imagine, is you had repeated exposure to that thing. And what happened is the association changed or became more complex. You now associated it with normal times, relative to when you were listening to it before, to neutral times, to times that aren't like full of anxiety and stress and, that aren't shitty. We can change the relationship we have to something. In fact, if you want to really program your brain in a lot of ways, this is how rewards work. A lot of people put like M&Ms and have M&Ms after they study. Well, a reward gets paired with that thing. So now, or with studying. So this is good. You made a question earlier about conditioning, and this is conditioning, right? Operant and classical conditioning, tying responses to certain stimuli so that your brain makes an association. In fact, with every once in a while, I'll have some clients who I see for sports psychology or for performance anxiety, which is a large part of sports psychology. And I think about this every time I have a really hard time with squats. I make sure that I'm not, and oh my God, that was so difficult, because that's tying that, like I'm making it a reality. And I'm not trying to be one of those woo-woo guys who say, what you say really, makes you the reality, but it does. The response
Yeah,
that you have will get
absolutely.
tied to that
Reinforced
thing.
behavior.
Yeah. Well, this is why, saying, nothing but a peanut, it was too
Yeah,
easy,
buddy.
yeah, exactly. That is very adaptive. That's a very helpful thing to do. You're tying a different response to that stimuli. Even more complex of an example. So you have a guy who goes to Afghanistan or Iraq, on a tour of duty, right? And he's making all kinds of different associations. There's trillions of associations. He's making also, your brain makes associations every second, every millisecond, a bunch of associations. Anything that you are perceiving, there are modicum sized associations occurring here. So he's making a whole bunch of them. He's the feeling of the fatigues on his skin, the sun, the smells, sweat. He's making some perhaps negative associations to people who are wearing, all kinds of different garb that people in that world might be making. He's making all kinds of different associations, like anything he's making association to, and everything he is making an association to. It's just a matter of how large is the size. So one of the strong associations he makes, and I imagine you're going to have some fun, everyone has fun examples for this one, is the sound of popping, gunfire, right, is always tied to danger. Because, a gun firing is dangerous. Even if it's under like recreational or under training purposes, there is still danger inherent. There's a piece of metal flying like super fast, right? And oftentimes it's tied to an extremely terrifying stimulus. Actually, I should be saying it better, a very stressful stimulus, an extremely stressful stimulus of getting shot at and shooting at other people. Now, if he were to get shot, or if he were to see somebody else get shot, right? The social element of that, right? Seeing somebody else, his brain would be learning the strongest association there is, physiological stress or massive social stressor. And that association would be one of the strongest there is. But if he weren't shot, or if he saw nobody else get shot, let's say, it would still be a very strong stimulus, or a very strong association, excuse me. Now, 6 months passes, a year passes by. He's been out of there for, 8 months or so, let's say. And now it's the 4th of July or 1st of July, and fireworks start to go off. Now, if he was not shot, or he saw nobody else get shot, there'd be a strong association, but maybe not that strong. And he might become irritable. He might become, anxious. He might become a little just wants to lock himself away and, unhappy. But if he got shot, or if somebody else got shot, his brain would have made such a strong association. And he might be having a full-on panic attack. He might be hiding under his bed, holding his gun. He might be freaking out. The whole time, rationally, consciously, he knows this is crazy. I know it's just fireworks. This is so dumb. And yet his brain is going, I need to do this. Holy shit, this is what I need to do. This is life or death. In fact, I should have made this. I say the steering wheel piece before. I do this often to show relative strength.
Which hand is on the steering wheel?
For listeners, I more often do this. For listeners, I'll much more often show which one, the brain or the mind, has a relative strength, and I move my each hand respective closer or further away from the webcam. So the brain has control, and it goes, I know what I need to do here. Here's what's going on. Whether it's a feeling, whether it's a thought, whether it's motivation, or whether it's a full-on behavioral response, panicking, freaking out, grabbing his gun. This is when we feel like, I just need to do this. Okay, is there a good rational reason? No? Okay, then it's your brain making you do it. Again, if it is not you, it is the brain. One other note, and I know we're running a little long here, I'm very aware of that. Thank you for your patience, is I'm remiss, I should have noted this earlier. With associations, your brain makes associations, right? There are 3 ways your brain makes associations. I'll keep it very short. One is firsthand experience. This is, something happens to us, our brain learns. Our sensors are getting direct response, effectively. Example of this would be, we touch a stove, our brain makes a strong association. We got burned. And how do we subconsciously react or behave around stoves? We never get too close. We never lean on a stove. We're very cautious around them. At a subconscious level, our brain dictates how we react to that stimulus. I can even say, we get broken up with by a girl who has got nose rings and tattoos and colored hair, and it's painful and stressful. Our brain would learn, I don't want to anthropomorphize the brain too much, which is a funny line in itself. Our brain would make us averse to women who might look like that. And we might form negative relationships in our head. We might say, oh yeah, girls like that, they're whores, they'll cheat on you, they're crazy, they're all this or all that. When we might know rationally, there are tons of different women who look like that, and they have all kinds of different perspectives and beliefs. Maybe there's stereotypes that exist, maybe there's, all kinds of other stuff going on, but we know that not all of them are like that. And yet we will want to generalize, which, we've talked about historically with the evolutionary stuff. So firsthand experience, your brain learns strongly. And the more stressful something is, the more your brain will learn. Secondly, is through modeling. Monkey see, monkey do, effectively. We're social animals. We evolved around other people. So we will learn from what others do. And a lot of mammals do this as well. Tons. Mice do this. Mice will let the younger mice go into the trap and die, so they know that it's safe or not to do so. We'll do similar things. The example I give is, we see our sister touch the stove and she gets burned and she starts crying. Our brain will make note of that. However, it will be a much weaker association because there's a lot more noise in that function. What happens to her might not happen to me. She could also be lying. Maybe the stove isn't always like that. Just when she touches it's like that. There's other variables that can be going on. And your brain just treats anything that it sees other people do as less than if it were to happen to you. Now, say something huge happens to other people. You see somebody get hit by a bus, let's say, our brain would learn, because that's a very strong stressor. Our brain would really learn from that. And, we're looking across the street, back and forth, down, up and down the street like crazy. But, if you were hit by a bus, you might not cross streets at all. So, our sister touches a stove, she gets burned. We're maybe careful around the stove for a week or two, or maybe more. And then eventually, we're not so careful at a subconscious level. We're not so careful. And then we get burned, and voila, back to firsthand experience, back to never touching the stove again, basically. The third way is, actually, it's a fun way to perhaps close this conversation off, is through the abstract, which is essentially propaganda and advertising and all kinds of other social contagion stuff. So I'll give the first nicer perspective here, which is that through the abstract is reading and writing. With reading, there's squiggles on a piece of paper, and you've given that letter, let's say, meaning. And when that letter has a relationship with other squiggles, we might call that a word. And then when certain groups of squiggles are with other groups of squiggles, we can say a sentence. We read squiggles on paper, and we divine immense meaning from them. This is how we, you can think about how crazy this is. You can look at a piece of paper, a recipe, to make muffins, and now you know how to make muffins. 2 minutes of reading and you understand something that you've never seen before, that you've never smelled before, that you've never experienced before at all. This is how engineering, this is how science, this is how mathematics, this is how anything gets passed down. And the fact that we can just spend, oftentimes a long time reviewing pieces of paper with lines on it and understand that stuff is crazy. This also goes for sound, right? I'm just making different pulses of sound, different sound waves, different pitches and all that other stuff, and you're taking it in. And now you understand complex different things. You could change your life completely based on what you read or what you hear. That's incredible. That's insanity. Now, of course, this is why advertising works and why it's like a multi-trillion-dollar, industry. This is how propaganda works. If you put it in front of another person, you will take it. Oh, excuse me. If something is put in front of you, you will take it in at a subconscious level. You cannot stop this. Your mind, rationally cannot guard against this because your brain is always creating associations. Always. Doesn't matter if you rationally know that's nonsense. That doesn't make sense. That doesn't apply to me. Your brain is making an association. And it is logging that in the book, especially if you tie it to a very stressful stimulus, like they hate you, this people bad, look at this group of people hurt other people. Your brain goes, oh my God, threat. Oh, I got to learn that. I gotta take care of that. And your brain makes that association. This is why we have subconscious biases all the time. And I'm not here to say, oh, that's shit that people were talking about before. Everybody's racist. Yeah, everybody is. Everyone has biases towards everything all the time. And I'm not saying that it's okay to just act with those biases all the time. Of course, I'm not saying don't react with how your brain wants to see things. We want to be rational as we can be. But we want to understand why these biases might occur, how they can influence our behavior, and most importantly, what we can do about them and how to eliminate them. So perhaps a cautionary tale to close things off. I feel like I might have missed a few big pieces there, but that's my big spiel on how the basis for how your psychology works, how stress is everything, how your brain forms associations based on stress, but also on anything, because your brain's always trying to learn about everything. That's why we have questions about how everything works all the time. How your brain will always have those associations. Your brain is like a hard drive, and it works on those associations. Your brain is not a thinking thing. Your brain, for how I'm defining it, the monkey brain, the reptilian brain, that subconscious aspect of you. It does not think. It does not care. It just wants to work with what it's learned, and it wants to keep you alive, and it wants you to survive. And that's the trouble. That's the primal. That's the cardinal sin, I guess, of this whole thing. So you got to learn it. We're going to talk about implications of this next episode, I believe. So please, what do you think?
I feel a lot smarter. There's a lot of things that I learned in this hour and a half, and I hope the listeners really. This is honestly something I'm going to come back and listen to myself, because there's some very insightful teaching, especially that last 30 minutes that we extended it for. Am I
Yeah.
ever grateful that I let you do that?
Yeah, great.
Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. And guys, like I said, stay tuned. Casper's going to be coming back on the next week. So our next podcast, and he's going to be continuing on with what we've already talked about and kind of expanding on that. So again, if you thought you've learned a lot today, stay tuned because you're about to learn more. So thank you, Kasper. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your time with us. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, man.